All right, everybody, good afternoon. This is Mr. Green. We are going to be discussing what we discussed today in class. Today, we really discussed the importance of history. The do now question to start the day was, even if the study of history would not help you get a job, is it important to still study it? Multiple students said yes because they love the subject. Multiple students said yes because they like the teacher. Multiple students said yes because it would help them from repeating history. Now here's a fun fact when we hear that phrase, history repeats itself. When Mark Twain actually came up with that comment, he never said history doesn't repeat itself. He says history rhymes. And the reason why he said history rhymes is because history can never be done the same way twice, because we already have the information of what's happened prior. Just like how you can never step into the same river twice. So we know that we always have a little bit of a background information about what's happened beforehand. But we went into the ideals that Jefferson had in terms of why learning history is important. And I'm going to read you the parts of the passage that they got read, and I'm going to break it down the same way I broke it down for them. Jefferson's use of history as a guide to conscientious citizenship. To anyone familiar with Jefferson's ideas, the extent to which he contributed to the democratization of the Republican thought during his time, while very limited, should not be surprising. The responsibilities citizens were expected to shoulder in his theories were considerable for his time, and they necessitated a well-informed public. Jefferson's republicanism required independence, and independence required an agile and intelligent mind that could differentiate self-government from despotic forms. This is why Jefferson proposed the use of Grecian, Roman, English, and American history, read from the Whig perspective, of course, but he also suggested that mature minds read Hume, the great apostle of Toryism, as Jefferson declared in a letter to John Cartwright. While Jefferson argued that Hume's works included the history of England needed to be republicanized, he did concede Hume's elegant style of writing. Yet he warned that Hume's work should not be put in the hands of our young people, which would infect them with the poison of his own principles of government. Rather, Jefferson hoped students would come to appreciate the Republican principles expressed in the Declaration of Independence, which had much in common with the elementary books of public right found in the works of Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. It is interesting to note that Jefferson often recommended the reading of Cicero, as he quoted from the De Officiis in his summary view of the rights of British America. So characteristic of Jefferson's view, the Ciceronian ideal, according to Burstein, he sought to combine scholarly expertise with worldly engagement. Now, to break that big chunk down, we really want to look at what Jefferson was saying in these ideas. Jefferson, we have to remember, was from the Whig tradition and the Democratic Republican tradition. In this, he believed that all government should have this federalist style, where we're going to be born this concept of Jeffersonian wards, these small communities that are going to be the ones that really end up taking care of the majority of the issues. He didn't believe in a strong federal government. Hume is going to write in the concept of a strong federal government because he saw how his writings on the colonies, his colonial history of England, his writing on the actual French Revolution speaks to his ideals of a strong central government. Whereas Jefferson said these ideas would poison our young children's minds when we're trying to raise up a generation of Republican citizens. Remember, when I say Republican, I'm not talking about the modern political party. I'm talking about the idea that the country is a republic. So with that in mind, he is going to also state that we can learn these things by reading the great books of the great minds these testaments that have stood the test of time, in an education that looks back onto our classics. Sounds pretty familiar to what we do here at Carolina Classical Academy, and all the students very quickly made that connection. Now, Jefferson anticipated that at each level of his gradational system of schooling would increase classes in history, including the first 3 years, wherein the great mass of people receive their instruction. The moral lessons Jefferson hoped students would retain from history were intended to teach them how to work out their own greatest happiness by showing them that it does not depend on the condition of life in which chance has placed them, but it is always the result of a good conscience, good health, occupation, and freedom in all just pursuits. We know the Aristotelian concept of happiness. It's something that we're trying to achieve, this great station in life. But we also want to look at Jefferson's ideals of happiness. He clearly declares in the Declaration of Independence that we are endowed by our Creator with these inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This pursuit of happiness, being educated in history, teaches you through the moral lessons how to actually pursue that pursuit of happiness, how to ensure, no matter what your station in life was, if you were a young man orphaned and abandoned in the Caribbean like Alexander Hamilton, if you were a farmer from Virginia like Jefferson himself, or if you were if you were poor, if you were rich, if you were however you were born, your station in life did not determine if you could pursue happiness or not, and an education in history made this possible. History could provide students with numerous examples of ways in which republics were undermined by political and religious corruption, greed, and decadence. Republican history instilled the importance of balancing independent thought and action with the public good, a moderation of wealth, the exercise of good judgment, selflessness, and interdependence. The history of Republican governments illustrated, and Jefferson understood, that the most seminal way to achieve Republican virtue was to decentralize political, economic, and religious power so that society could benefit from a greater number of informed minds. In many respects, republicanism and free inquiry became synonymous, eventually implying the value of normative critique of government by citizens. This led to the idea that the public good could only be understood and legitimized through public deliberation sustained by an educated citizenry on a local level. It was a common sense notion at that time that any efforts at establishing public schooling must occur locally. One could not exist in a substantive way without the other. Understanding the value of education and promoting opportunity, Jefferson believed adults could ensure, if given opportunities, the creation of formal ward schools and their Republican curriculum. The first elements of morality may be instilled into the minds of children, according to Jefferson, so that they may strengthen their judgment. History taught in this manner would apprise youth of the past, enable them to judge the future, and avail them of the experience of other times and other nations. It would qualify them as judges of actions and the designs of men, and to know ambition under every disguise, and to defeat its views. So Jefferson is going to say that this study of Republican history, the study of these ideals, we're going to call it classical liberalism or liberal arts. If we're going to study in this manner, we are going to learn this virtue. We're going to see that the splitting of political, economic, and religious power from the overarching government into the local wards was important. A lot of people like to think of Jefferson's ideals of the separation of church and state, that he separated church and state. No, he separated state from an overbearing church. Now, what do I mean by that? South Carolina, for example, was an Anglican state. Even if you were Catholic, if you were Lutheran, if you were a Congregationalist, you still had to pay a tax to be able to worship in South Carolina to the Anglican Church. He said that doesn't need to be the state. Each individual state should not be recognized as have its own religion. So we're seeing that separation of state and religion there. It's not a freedom of religion, but more of a freedom from in this context. Now, not freedom from, but a freedom of. With that in mind, he is going to say that having these things separated, especially when we look at educating our youth, having it done on a local level, these individuals are going to know how to teach what's most important to these individuals or to their students. Key example, you wouldn't take somebody who's never stepped foot in South Carolina and ask them to give history lessons about South Carolina. Because while they could give you a very superficial history, because they could read from a textbook, they would not be able to actually give you this is what it actually looks like when you're standing on Fort Sumter, looking out at Fort Moultrie, when you're looking out from Folly Beach onto Fort Sumter. They're not going to be able to tell you, I have actually stood where the first boat docked in South Carolina, like you would get from someone who's from this area. It makes a significant difference. Now, the idea of the public good is legitimized through public deliberation sustained by an educated citizenry. The entire reason we have an electoral college system is because our first founding fathers did not believe that the citizenry was able to speak for itself. They didn't believe they were educated enough, so we would elect someone who could vote for us. If we wanted to be more democratic, which is what Jefferson was pursuing, then everyone needed to have the ability to actually know what they're talking about. Everyone needed to be an informed citizen at some level. Now, education is going to make this very prominent, and a Republican curriculum is going to make this, or that classical liberal curriculum is going to make this possible. He believed that we could teach our children to study the past to help them understand other nations and qualify them and judges the actions of men, so they could not be fooled by ambitions. We know that Madison is going to write about faction in Federalist 10 and 51, and he's going to mention the idea that a pure democracy would lead to issue. It would lead to the fact that these individuals, if they wanted something, everyone's going to go for what they long for. Everyone's going to try to achieve what is best for them. If that, no matter what happens to everyone else, that you're going to pursue your own devices. So, in this ideal, you could see if someone was actually ambitious about what was best, or what was ambitious about what was best for them. Like I said, this is a wonderful read. We're going to continue to talk about Jefferson on Monday, and then we will move into our actual content on Tuesday. If you do have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to reach out. But I hope you enjoy your weekend, and that you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.